I like your show. I like how you call homosexuality an abomination.
I don't say homosexuality is an abomination, Mr. President. The Bible does.
Yes, it does. Leviticus
18:22.
chapter and verse. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions while I had you here. I'm interested in selling my youngest daughter into slavery, as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. She's a Georgetown sophomore, speaks fluent Italian, always cleared the table when it was her turn. What would a good price for her be? While thinking about that, can I ask another? My chief of staff, Leo McGarry, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police? Here's one that's really important, because we've got a lot of sports fans in this town. Touching the skin of a dead pig makes one unclean, Leviticus 11:7. If they promise to wear gloves, can the Washington Redskins still play football? Can Notre Dame? Can West Point? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from two different threads? Think about those questions, would you?
Hold on, where am I? Ah, there we go. Well, Mr. President, I doubt you were asking me because you actually wanted a better understanding of the Bible or instruction on how to live biblically. But in case anyone else who's listening actually does want some answers, I'll do my best. So, what was your first question again?
I'm interested in selling my youngest daughter into slavery, as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7.
Ah, yeah, okay. So, if we look at the verses after that verse, we get more context and can see it's actually talking about receiving a dowry when handing her over in marriage. You can see in verse 10, it says that she must not be deprived of marital rights. Verse 11 even says if he doesn't provide her with her marital rights, she gets to go free. Now this passage is probably about her becoming a concubine rather than a wife, which is why the word servant, or slave in some translations, is used. This doesn't refer to chattel slavery, which is the man I'm assuming you were thinking of. Compare Judges 8:31 to Judges 9:18, which interchangeably refer to Abimelech's mum as Gideon's concubine and Gideon's handmaid, servant, or slave, depending on which translation you look at. However, if you do want to know about whether or not you can sell your daughter into chattel slavery, I'd point you towards a verse later in the same chapter, Exodus 21:16, that says that kidnapping people to sell them into slavery was an offence punishable by death, or 1 Timothy 1:9 and 10, which lists slave traders as among those considered ungodly and sinful. However, that list also includes those practicing homosexuality as sinful, so I suppose you don't like that verse too much.
While thinking about that, can I ask another?
Yeah, of course.
My chief of staff, Leo McGarry, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police?
Thankfully, you don't have to do either. Keep in mind, Christianity and Judaism are two different religions with separate covenants. Under Mosaic law, yes, you had to observe the Sabbath a certain way, and could face the death penalty for working on it. But in Acts 15:5-29, a number of apostles and elders got together to discuss whether or not non-Jews had to follow Mosaic law, since Jesus had already fulfilled that law. Check out Matthew 5:17. Those apostles and elders determined that it was not necessary for non-Jews, that means Gentile Christians like me, to be burdened with the yoke of Mosaic law. However, that chapter still also forbids homosexuality, since it instructs to abstain from sexual immorality. So I'm guessing you don't like those verses too much either. I'd also consider Colossians 2:16, which says to not let anyone judge you in regards to how you observe the Sabbath. So if your chief of staff insists on working on the Sabbath, he has the freedom in Christ to do so. What was the next question?
Touching the skin of a dead pig makes one unclean, Leviticus 11:7. If they promise to wear gloves, can the Washington Redskins still play football?
Well, like with that last question, pigs being unclean animals is part of Mosaic law that Gentiles aren't bound by. In fact, Jesus addresses this in Mark 7:18 and 19, where he says, "Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body." And just in case that wasn't clear enough, Mark adds a note that says, In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean, which would include pigs. Furthermore, in Acts 10:11-15, God gives the Apostle Peter a vision where he sees a sheet with lots of animals that were considered unclean, and God tells him to get up, kill, and eat. When Peter refused, saying he'd never eaten anything unclean, God said, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." So not only are you allowed to touch a football as a Christian, you even have the freedom to eat it if you want to. Not that I'd recommend it. But what was the question after that?
Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side?
What? No. Where are you getting that from? Like, yeah, Deuteronomy 22:9 does say to not plant two kinds of seed in your vineyard, but it never mentions being put to death for it. It just says that the crops and the fruit will be considered defiled or unclean, so you just wouldn't be allowed to eat them. Where are you getting the idea anyone was killed for that?
Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from two different threads?
No. The Bible never says to kill anyone for wearing clothes made from two different threads. Leviticus 19:19 does say to not wear clothes woven from two kinds of material, but it never specifies any punishment for it. It just says not to. I'd also like to point out, again, the clothes made of two kinds of fabric and two different crops planted side by side rules are both more examples of Mosaic law that Christians aren't bound by. You know, a lot of people criticize Christians by saying they just pick and choose which of the Bible's teachings they actually want to follow. But usually the reason it seems that way is because a lot of Old Testament laws were only meant for the Israelites of that time, and Christians don't need to follow them. The Old Testament actually foretold that God was going to one day make a new covenant with his people in Jeremiah 31. That's why some Old Testament rules don't apply to us today. But as for homosexuality, which was the original point of contention here, yeah, there are Judaic Old Testament passages that prohibit it, like Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13. But there's also Christian New Testament passages against it, like in Romans 1:25-27, 1 Timothy 1:9 and 10, and 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 10. So if you really do want clarification on how you should approach all those situations according to the Bible, don't sell your daughter into slavery. Let your employees observe the Sabbath as they see fit. Play football if you feel like it, plant whatever crops you want to plant, wear whatever fabric you want, and don't condone homosexuality. Oh wait, that's not my line, is it? Hold on, let me look at the script again. Sell my daughter into slavery, burn my mum for wearing clothes, think about those. Yep, okay, I got it now. Go from think about those questions. I'll get it this time.
Think about those questions, would you?
Me don't know. Me just a stupid Christian. Me don't know anything about the Bible. Woo! Get wrecked, fascist! Ah! That's stupid.